That's a great question, and I try to take that on as directly as possible in the book. And so some of the things I emphasize that I want to restate here is that formal institutions, like the quality of pre-K through high school education, can play an important role in eliminating some of those gaps. And there's some very compelling quasi-experimental and experimental evidence looking at what happens when, say, for example, kids who are trying to go to a charter school that's oversubscribed enter a lottery, and then some go to a good charter school and some go to a bad charter school. And what happens immediately, and then what happens a few years down the road, maybe even 10 years down the road, in terms of the outcomes of those kids. And there are some meaningful differences in those outcomes. And likewise, some very careful studies have shown that early childhood educational experiences that are higher quality can have long-lasting benefits. Now, I don't think anyone who's following that literature closely thinks that that's the only thing that needs to happen. If we just improve school quality for kids in the worst off circumstances, that's going to completely do it. There's also evidence from looking at what happens at the household level and the family level that is very important to consider. And so I spend some time in the book discussing some of the habits of parents in highly successful, often immigrant families in England and in the United States. And what they seem to have in common is this belief that their children can learn and develop and advance. And if they pour in a lot of effort and resources into teaching them, there's going to be results in the other end. And they have resources themselves to read about the best practices in child development, and are reading to their children on a regular basis, every night if they're young kids, and doing those kinds of practices that result in learning performance. So when you look at the behavior of children in those kind of upwardly mobile households, they're spending more time studying than they are watching TV, where it's flipped in the other direction for the other kids. So the question is, can there be anything done about that? And I think the answer is yes. And there's some compelling studies that look at programs as simple as sending text messages to parents to remind them to read to their kids. And especially if they're coming from a low literacy family themselves, when their parents didn't read to them, they're not just going to naturally come to the idea that this is what parenting involves, reading to their kids every night. And so, but if somebody at their school and somebody they trust in their community tells them that this is a great idea and it's going to improve their kids' lives over the long run, and they send them things like text reminders, or they send them books, as this Dolly Parton sponsored program does, send books to my kids, for example, live in DC, and every kid born in DC gets a book from Dolly Parton's foundation for the first few years of their life. And there's been some careful studies that have shown that this has long measurable consequences on literacy and so on. So these are, you could call these cultural practices, but they're not cultural practices in the sense that they're passed down through ancient traditions. In fact, most humans on planet Earth didn't know how to read until quite recently. So there's nothing that's kind of deeply human about this. We have to, but we're flexible, and we can learn from each other, and we can learn from people in our community. So I think that's also one of the reasons I'm so concerned about segregation, economic and racial, is because when you isolate people who don't have those kinds of practices, they don't have a chance to talk to people they trust and who care about them, that can give them other alternative ideas.